Hello, my dear lore seekers, and welcome back to the lore of sleep. Settle in. Let the worries of the day drift away like dust on the wind. Tonight, our journey takes us across the vast expanse of the Cosmere to a world perpetually scoured by high storms, a land of shattered plains and ancient secrets, Roshar. Here, amidst the chaos of returning desolations and the echoes of broken oaths, stand orders of knights bound to magical Spren, wielding powers that defy the very laws of nature. They are the Knights Radiant, figures of myth reborn. But among these orders, one stands apart, cloaked not in glory, but in the severe mantle of unbending law. They follow a path of rigid certainty in a world consumed by chaos, bound to enforce justice as defined by codes external to themselves. Tonight, we delve into the heart of judgment itself, exploring the complete history, the unyielding philosophy, and the unique spiritual bonds of the Order of Skybreakers. What truly drives these arbiters of the law? Who is the ancient, almost broken herald who guides their path through millennia of shadow? And what does it mean to swear allegiance, not just to the law, but to eventually become it? Quiet your mind now, and let us seek the truth behind the Skybreakers. This exploration will cover the history of their patron, the Herald Nale, the nature of the enigmatic Highspren they bond, the demanding ideals they must swear, the long and often shadowed history of the Order itself, particularly following the cataclysm known as the Recreance, the awesome powers of gravitation and division they command, the complex philosophy underpinning their actions, the pivotal journey of Szeth-son-Neturo as a modern embodiment of their internal conflicts, and finally, the potential future of the Skybreakers in the face of the true desolation. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now let's begin. The story of the Skybreakers begins long before the current era, rooted in the very foundations of Roshar's cyclical wars and the divine figures who shaped them, the Heralds. Roshar's history is marked by the desolations, recurring apocalypses where the malevolent forces led by the Unmade and the Fused, servants of the Shard Odium, waged war against humanity. Defending mankind were the 10 Heralds, figures granted immense power and immortality by the Shard Honor through a divine agreement known as the Oath Pact. Their duty was harrowing, led humanity against the Voidbringers during a desolation, and upon death or victory, returned to the horrific realm of Braze, to endure millennia of torture until one of them broke, triggering the next return of the enemy. This cycle of war, suffering, and temporary reprieve defined Rosharan antiquity for thousands of years, leaving an indelible mark on the heralds themselves. Their immense age, counted in millennia, punctuated by unimaginable torment, inflicted deep psychological wounds, twisting their original natures and purposes. Among these 10 figures was unyielding, often known simply as Nale, or Nin, by his order. His divine attributes, granted or perhaps merely recognized by honor, were those of justice and confidence, often interpreted through the lens of upholding law. Within the hierarchy of the heralds, he represented the enforcement of rules and the certainty required to pass judgment. His association with the number 9, Nin, further cemented his identity. Like the other heralds, Nale was not a god in the traditional sense, but a cognitive shadow, the spiritual imprint of a soul, heavily invested by honor, anchored to the Rosharan system, and bound by the terms of the Oath Pact. Before the cumulative trauma of the Oath Pact irrevocably altered him, Nal's personality likely reflected his divine attributes in a more balanced form. He would have been just, resolute in his duties, dedicated to preserving civilization against the onslaught of Odium's forces. A certain severity might always have been part of his nature, given his focus on law and judgment, but it would have been tempered by the context of protecting humanity and upholding the Oath Pact alongside his fellow heralds. He served often under the strategic guidance of Ishar, the herald associated with luck, piety, and priesthood, who frequently took a leading role among the 10. While their core goal was shared, it is conceivable that Nale and Ishar held differing philosophical views on the best methods to ensure order and survival, perhaps foreshadowing Nal's later divergence. Yet their shared experience forged bonds, however strained they might become. The very structure of the Oath Pact, however, contained the seeds of its participants unraveling. The burden of immortality, coupled with the certainty of repeated, horrific torture upon Braze, exerts an unimaginable pressure. For a mind inherently focused on justice and law, the chaotic cycle of destruction, and the perceived failures leading to each return, could foster an increasingly desperate need for absolute order, for rules that could prevent the cycle from ever beginning again. This endless suffering warped the very essence of the heralds, and Nal's pursuit of justice would eventually become a chilling example of this degradation, transforming a divine virtue into a rigid, unforgiving, and ultimately destructive obsession. Nale served as the divine patron for the Order of Knights Radiant, known as the Skybreakers. His attributes directly shaped their initial philosophy, establishing them as the order most concerned with law, justice, and the enforcement of societal rules. While other orders drew inspiration from attributes like protection, illumination, or cultivation, the Skybreakers mirrored Nale's focus on the structures that govern society. Nale himself possessed an artifact of immense power that set him apart from the Radiants who would follow his order, his Honor Blade. These 10 blades were gifted by honor to the heralds, granting them access to the surges, the fundamental forces of Roshar manipulated through Stormlight. without requiring the Nahel bond with a spren or the swearing of oaths. Nale's honor blade specifically granted the powers of gravitation and division, the same surges his order would later access through bonding Highspren. This meant Nale wielded these powers innately, without the filter or partnership of a spren, possibly contributing to his absolute confidence in his own judgment. The early Skybreakers, founded during the epochs of recurring desolations, likely served crucial roles alongside the other 9 orders of Knights Radiant. Their focus on law suggests they acted as enforcers, judges, and perhaps military police within the human armies. They might have adjudicated disputes, maintained discipline, guarded prisoners, and ensured adherence to strategic commands, providing a necessary structure amidst the chaos of war against the Voidbringers. It remains unclear if their early philosophy already emphasized adherence to external codes as strictly as it would later, or if they initially operated under a broader interpretation of justice, guided by Honor's direct influence and Nale's leadership, before his psyche began to fracture. A pivotal event occurred that drastically shifted Nale's perspective and planted the seeds for his later madness: the investigation into the destruction of the planet Ashen. Known in Rosharan myth as the Tranquiline Halls, Ashen was another inhabited world in the Rosharan system, destroyed long ago by the uncontrolled use of Surge Binding, the very powers wielded by the Knights Radiant. Nale was among those Radiants and Heralds who witnessed the aftermath, the utter devastation wrought when magical power was unleashed without sufficient checks or understanding. The horror of a world literally burned from the sky by the same forces they used to defend Roshar left a profound and terrifying impression on Nale. This catastrophic event became the lens through which he viewed all Surge Binding. It convinced him, with the terrible certainty that would come to define his madness, that the Surges themselves represented an existential threat to Roshar, potentially even greater than Odium. The risk of another Ashen, another world scoured clean by unchecked radiant power, became his overriding fear. This trauma provides a crucial link between his original duty as a herald, protecting Roshar, and his later, seemingly paradoxical crusade against the Knights Radiant. His rigid interpretation of law became singularly focused. The ultimate law was to prevent another Ashen. This objective, born of witnessing planetary annihilation, began to supersede all other considerations, including the immediate need to fight the desolations or the inherent value of the Radiants as defenders. His pursuit of justice narrowed into a terrifyingly specific mandate: control or eliminate Surge Binding at any cost. The final breaking point for Nale, the moment his mind truly fractured under the strain, likely occurred during one of the agonizing cycles of torture on Braze, following a desolation. Having already witnessed Ashen's destruction, and perhaps feeling the weight of Honor's splintering, or the perceived failures of the Oath Pact, another round of unending torment pushed him beyond recovery. His specific form of madness, became a terrifying amplification of his original nature. An extreme, almost pathological adherence to the absolute letter of the law, coupled with an intense paranoia regarding surgy binding and anyone capable of wielding it. Empathy, nuance, and the spirit of the law were burned away, leaving only cold, hard legality. His divine attribute of justice twisted into its most severe and unforgiving form. He became convinced that only by rigidly enforcing existing laws, and specifically by preventing the rise of new surge binders, Knights Radiant, could he prevent Roshar from suffering Ashen's fate, and thus fulfill his twisted interpretation of the Oath Pact. This marked the beginning of his millennia-long shadow war against the very orders he once helped establish. Central to the Skybreakers' identity is their unique bond with Highspren, the sapient spren who grant them their powers. To understand the Skybreakers, one must first understand these enigmatic beings. Highspren, like other advanced spren such as honor spren or cryptics, primarily exist in the cognitive realm, known on Roshar as Shadesmar. This is a bizarre, conceptual landscape, often depicted as a sea of dark obsidian beads, representing the physical objects of the world, under a strange sky. Sentient spren are embodiments of the concepts and forces that humans perceive or interact with. They possess independent consciousness, societies, and motivations, though their existence is fundamentally tied to the thoughts and emotions of physical beings. While honor spren embody ideals like oaths and protection, and cultivation spren embody growth and the natural world, Highspren are drawn to something different, the abstract structures of order and agreement. Visually, Highspren are often described in stark, rigid terms. They might appear as crystalline structures, as lines of pure light moving in precise, angular patterns, sometimes evoking the appearance of cracks spreading through glass or the formal lines of legal text. Their coloration is frequently described as black and white, lacking the vibrant hues of many other spren, reflecting their association with the clear-cut, unambiguous nature of absolute law. Their conceptual domain is that of rules, laws, contracts, and agreements, particularly those that exist externally to an individual's personal beliefs. They are drawn to the frameworks societies create to govern themselves, the physical laws that dictate the universe's function, and the very concept of binding agreements. They are, though, in essence, spren of objective structure and consequence, fascinated by the human and cosmic tendency to define and adhere to systems. This inherent nature deeply influences the philosophy of the Radiants they choose to bond. While an honor spren might be drawn to a person striving to live up to a personal code of honor, a Highspren seems more interested in individuals who respect and seek to operate within established, external systems of rules. They embody the ideal of objective law, standing in contrast to the more subjective concepts represented by other Radiant spren, like honor spren, concerned with personal honor and protection. or cryptics, concerned with personal truths and lies. This fundamental difference in the Spren's nature provides a compelling explanation for why the Skybreaker path emphasizes external codes over internal moral compasses. The Spren themselves are oriented that way. The nihil bond between a Highspren and a Skybreaker is, therefore, a pact deeply rooted in the concept of law itself. Highspren are likely attracted to potential radiants who demonstrate a profound respect for rules, a desire for order and certainty, or perhaps even a deep-seated need for judgment, either to receive it or to mete it out. They might seek individuals who distrust the fallibility of personal feeling and instead look for answers in established codes. This contrasts sharply with the qualities honor Spren seek, such as individuals striving for noble ideals even amidst personal failure. The bonding process itself involves stages of increasing connection, shared perception, and mutual understanding, as with other nihil bonds. However, the influence of the Highspren likely reinforces the Radiant's focus on rules and adherence. The bond isn't merely a source of power, it's a dynamic relationship where the Spren's own nature shapes the Radiant's journey. Highspren seem to take an active, judgmental role, particularly as the Radiant progresses through the later ideals. They assess the Radiant's commitment and adherence to their chosen external code, potentially with less concern for the morality or consequences of that code than for the faithfulness of its execution. This creates a feedback loop. The Radiant swears to follow rules, the Highspren judges their adherence, and this judgment reinforces the importance of rule following, pushing the Skybreaker further down a path defined by external validation rather than internal conviction. Unlike Sylphrena, who constantly engages Kaladin in debates about the meaning and application of honor, a Highspren might simply ask, "Did you follow the code?" This inherent nature of the Spren partner contributes significantly to the renowned rigidity of the Skybreaker order. From the Highspren's perspective, their view of humans and Roshar might be filtered through the lens of rules and systems. They might perceive societies primarily as frameworks of laws, physics as the ultimate code, and individuals as agents operating within, or frustratingly outside of these structures. Their alienness may manifest in a difficulty understanding human inconsistency, emotional reasoning, or the concept of mercy when it contradicts established procedure. They might see laws as paramount, perhaps even holding codified rules in higher esteem than individual lives or subjective experiences of suffering. Whether Highspren themselves change significantly through the bond remains an open question within the lore. While all nihil bonds are transformative for both parties, it's unclear if exposure to human nuance might soften a Highspren's rigidity, or if witnessing human fallibility and rule-breaking merely reinforces their conviction that absolute external laws are the only reliable path. Their unique perspective, however, is undeniably foundational to the Skybreaker identity. The path of a Skybreaker Knight Radiant is defined by the swearing of 5 ideals, oaths spoken aloud that deepen their Nahel bond with their Highspren, grant them increasing access to Stormlight and the surges of gravitation and division, and eventually allow them to manifest Shard Plate and a Shard Blade. While all orders share the first ideal, the subsequent oaths of the Skybreakers forge a unique and potentially perilous philosophical journey centered on the absolute authority of external law. The Radiant ideals in general serve as a framework for growth and commitment, representing a knight's dedication to certain principles. They act as a magical and spiritual ladder, with each step requiring greater understanding and embodiment of the Order's core tenets. These oaths resonate with the remnants of Honor's investiture and the specific nature of the Spren being bonded, shaping the Radiant's powers and responsibilities. The first ideal, shared by all 10 orders, is life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. This foundational oath establishes a baseline commitment to valuing life, striving for self-improvement and resilience, and recognizing the importance of growth and the process over mere outcomes. Even for the Skybreakers, whose path emphasizes rigid adherence to law, this first step grounds them in fundamental ethical principles. It acknowledges the inherent value of existence and the need for personal strength in pursuing one's path. However, the subsequent actions of Nale and some of his followers raise questions about how consistently even this first ideal is interpreted or prioritized when it conflicts with their later, more specific oaths regarding the law. Nale's crusade, for instance, involved taking lives to prevent a potential future threat, arguably prioritizing a perceived destination, preventing another Ashin, over the lives immediately before him. The second ideal marks the Skybreakers' first major divergence from other orders. While its exact wording can vary slightly, it centers on the theme, "I will seek justice," or more commonly, "I will put the law before all else." This oath signifies a dedication to a system of justice or a body of law that exists outside of the individual's personal feelings or moral judgments. It represents a commitment to an external standard as the primary guide for action. This focus appeals strongly to certain personality types, those seeking certainty in a chaotic world, individuals who distrust the subjectivity of personal conscience, those who crave order and predictability, or perhaps those who feel failed by inconsistent or arbitrary systems in the past. It offers a clear, defined path. This contrasts starkly with, for example, the Windrunner's second ideal, "I will protect those who cannot protect themselves," which is driven by an internal sense of responsibility and empathy, rather than adherence to an external code. The Skybreaker chooses the system over the self from this early stage. The third ideal is arguably the most crucial and defining step on the Skybreaker path, and it holds the potential for great good or immense danger. I will swear myself to a single ideal, often interpreted as dedicating oneself to follow a specific external code of laws, or submitting to the judgment of a chosen external authority or master. This is the point where the Skybreaker explicitly outsources their moral reasoning. They are not swearing to uphold what is universally right or just, but rather to absolutely follow, to the letter, the specific code or authority they have chosen. The gravity of this choice cannot be overstated, as it requires the Radiant to potentially act against their own conscience or compassion, if their chosen code demands it. The Highspren plays a critical role here, actively judging the Radiant's commitment and adherence. The Spren isn't concerned with the morality of the code, only with the Radiant's faithfulness in following it. This creates a system where unwavering obedience, even to a flawed code, is magically reinforced and rewarded. Examples illuminate the implications. Nale's Skybreakers, during his millennia-long crusade, likely swore to follow his interpretation of ancient laws, which he twisted to justify hunting down potential surge-binders. Their oaths compelled them to commit acts that appear profoundly unjust by almost any other standard, yet within their sworn framework, they were acting lawfully. Szeth-son-Neturo's journey provides another complex example. His initial state under the Shin Oathstone forced absolute obedience, a dark mirror of this ideal. After being freed and joining the Skybreakers under Nale, he sought a reliable code. His eventual swearing of the third ideal, to follow Dalinar Kholin, represents a conscious choice to submit to a different kind of authority, one based on Dalinar's evolving codes of war and his efforts toward uniting Roshar against Odium. The contrast between swearing to follow Nale's fear-driven mandate versus Dalinar's principles highlights the vast range of outcomes this ideal allows, entirely dependent on the nature of the chosen code. This structure institutionalizes unquestioning obedience, creating a powerful tool for order, but also making the order exceptionally vulnerable to corruption if the chosen authority or code is flawed. The ideal itself doesn't prevent injustice. It merely demands adherence to the chosen system, whatever that system may be. The fourth ideal represents the culmination of this path. I will become the law. Having dedicated themselves to finding, choosing, and following an external code, the Skybreaker now transcends mere adherence and embodies the very essence of justice and judgment according to that code. They no longer just interpret or enforce the law, they are the law. This likely grants enhanced powers related to judgment, discerning truth, perhaps linked to the precision of division, or enforcing consequences with absolute authority. It is also the stage where full shardplate typically manifests. Nale serves as a chilling example of this ideal, combined with madness. In his own mind, he is justice. His pronouncements are final, his actions inherently lawful, because he embodies the law itself. This absolute certainty, stemming from the fourth ideal and amplified by his broken psyche, makes him incredibly dangerous, as he perceives no possibility of error or need for appeal. For Szeth, achieving this ideal under Dalinar's code presents intriguing possibilities. Would he become the embodiment of Dalinar's codes of war, a figure capable of dispensing justice, aimed at unity and redemption rather than mere punishment? The fourth ideal grants immense power and authority, but it carries an inherent risk. Embodying law without checks and balances can easily lead to tyranny, especially if the code chosen at the third ideal was flawed, or if the Radiant lacks humility. The absolute certainty it fosters can be a dangerous foundation for wielding godlike power. The fifth ideal remains speculative, as no Skybreaker in the known texts has canonically sworn it. Theories about its nature often follow the established progression. It could represent perfect, unwavering adherence to the embodied law of the fourth ideal, achieving a state of absolute judgment beyond question. Alternatively, some speculate it might involve a transcendent understanding, moving beyond the mere letter of the law to grasp its underlying spirit or intent, potentially offering a path for growth or even redemption for the Order's rigid philosophy. It might involve reconciling the chosen external code with universal principles, or achieving a perfect resonance with the remnants of Honor's divine intent regarding oaths and bonds. Whatever its specific form, the fifth ideal would represent the ultimate endpoint of a philosophy built entirely on the foundation of external, absolute law. Given the trajectory of the preceding ideals, it could signify either ultimate, incorruptible justice or ultimate, inescapable rigidity. The history of the Skybreakers is as long and complex as that of the Knights Radiant themselves, marked by a unique divergence during Roshar's greatest historical crisis, and shaped profoundly by the millennia-long influence of their increasingly fractured heraldic patron, Nale. Their story begins, like all Radiant Orders, in the crucible of the Desolations. One of the most defining moments in Radiant history was the Day of Recreance, an event shrouded in myth and misunderstanding for centuries. On this day, thousands of Knights Radiant across almost all orders simultaneously abandoned their oaths, effectively killing their bonded Spren, which solidified into the shard blades and shard plate coveted in the modern era. The reasons were complex, primarily stemming from the shocking discovery that the ancestors of modern humans were the original invaders of Roshar, and the so-called Voidbringers they fought were the planet's native singers. This revelation shattered the Radiant's sense of purpose and righteousness, leading them to believe their oaths were based on lies and their powers inherently dangerous. However, the Order of Skybreakers stands out as a significant exception. While records are incomplete, it is strongly suggested that the vast majority of Skybreakers did not participate in the Recreance. Several factors likely contributed to this. Nale's influence was paramount. As a herald, he possessed knowledge hidden from most Radiants, including the truth of human origins, and his command likely forbade participation. Furthermore, the very nature of the Highspren and the Skybreaker philosophy provided insulation. Highspren, being embodiments of external rules and pacts, may not have experienced the same crisis of faith as Honor-spren, whose bonded radiants felt their ideals betrayed, or cryptics, whose radiants confronted shattering truths about identity. Skybreakers were sworn to follow their chosen codes. The revelation about human history, while potentially disturbing, did not necessarily invalidate those specific codes or the pact between Radiant and Spren. Their adherence was to the system they had chosen, not to a grand, potentially flawed narrative about Roshar's destiny. In a way, their characteristic rigidity, their focus on the letter of the agreement over the underlying spirit or historical context, became a survival mechanism, allowing the Order and their Spren to weather the storm that decimated the others. In the aftermath of the Recreance, with most Radiant Orders dissolved and Surge Binding largely absent from the world, Null embarked on his long, secret crusade, haunted by the destruction of Ashen, and perhaps guided by Honor's final warnings before his splintering about the dangers of uncontrolled surge binding. Nale came to believe that preventing the return of the Desolations required preventing the return of the Knights Radiant. His mission became the systematic elimination of nascent Radiants, individuals showing the potential to bond Spren and gain surge-binding abilities. He interpreted ancient laws and prophecies through the lens of his madness, convincing himself that this horrific task was the only way to ensure Roshar's survival. For millennia, Nale and his loyal Skybreakers operated in the shadows, hunting down proto-radiants across Roshar. They used Nale's authority as a herald, often perceived as a divine figure or demigod by locals. His mastery of surge binding via the Honor Blade, and the skills of his order to identify and neutralize these perceived threats, often justifying their actions as necessary enforcement of laws against dangerous magic. This chilling campaign likely killed countless potential heroes before they could ever realize their destiny, instilling a deep-seated fear of surge binding in many cultures and contributing to the Radiance fading into myth. Nale's interactions with characters like Lift, whom he attempts to apprehend, Woom, a proto-truth watcher whom he executes, and the Stump, another nascent edge dancer, provide glimpses into his ruthless methods and unwavering conviction during this period. This millennia-long crusade both stemmed from and further entrenched Nale's madness. His actions became increasingly paranoid and devoid of compassion, to twisting his original attribute of justice into a cold, legalistic engine of death, all under the guise of preventing a greater catastrophe. Maintaining the order in secret for thousands of years presented significant challenges. How did Nale recruit new members when the Radiants were figures of myth or fear? He likely sought out individuals predisposed to his worldview, those drawn to authority, who craved certainty, who preferred black and white thinking, perhaps veterans of law enforcement, military officers, or magistrates disillusioned with the perceived chaos and moral ambiguity of the world. He might have targeted those traumatized by uncontrolled magic or societal breakdown, offering them the comfort of absolute rules and a clear enemy. Indoctrination would have been crucial, training new recruits not just in Skybreaker oaths and powers, but specifically in Nale's warped interpretation. Emphasis would be placed on absolute obedience to him as the ultimate legal authority, the living embodiment of the third and fourth ideals. The Order operated in deep secrecy, perhaps from hidden bases or simply by maintaining strict protocols, ensuring their continued existence remained unknown to the wider world until the cusp of the true desolation. By the time the main events of the Stormlight Archive begin, the Skybreakers were still active, a secret society operating under Nala's command. Their exact numbers and level of coordination are unclear, but they possessed the knowledge and ability to identify and, if necessary, eliminate individuals beginning to form Nahel bonds. Their activities likely included enforcing local laws, where convenient, providing cover and reinforcing their identity as agents of order, continuing Nale's secret crusade, gathering intelligence on potential threats, including nascent Radiants, and perhaps preparing for the prophesied return of the Desolations, albeit with the intention of controlling or suppressing Surge-binders rather than joining them. It was during this period that Nale encountered Szeth-son-Neturo, the Shin assassin declared truthless and bound to the Oathstone. Finding Szeth after his long enslavement and numerous high-profile assassinations, Nale offered him a place within the Skybreakers. He provided Szeth with a truth, that he was never truly truthless, gave him a purpose, rigorous training, and the structured environment of the Order. Szeth, desperate for absolution and certainty after years of forced killing, initially embraced Nale's authority and the Skybreaker path. This period also potentially involved Helarandavar, Shallan's elder brother, who seemed to be associated with the Skybreakers before his death. Nale's millennia-long, unchallenged leadership, combined with the inherent Skybreaker focus on submitting to external authority, especially at the third ideal, had created an institution deeply permeated by his specific madness. New recruits weren't just joining an order, they were being inducted into Nale's paranoid worldview, likely selected and trained to perpetuate it. The modern Skybreakers were, therefore, not merely individuals following a mad leader, but a corrupted institution, largely complicit in his crusade through centuries of indoctrination and operational inertia. The powers wielded by the Skybreakers, granted through their bond with Highspren, or, in Nale's case, his honor blade, are formidable, revolving around the surges of gravitation and division. These fundamental forces grant them control over physical laws and the very integrity of matter, making them exceptionally dangerous and versatile knights radiant. Gravitation, known by its essence, Kajak, allows surge binders to manipulate the gravitational bonds affecting objects or themselves. This manifests primarily through the application of lashings. A basic lashing changes the effective direction of gravity for a person or object. Applying one lashing makes something fall up relative to the ground or sideways along a wall. Multiple lashings can be applied to increase the force and speed of this altered fall, enabling high-speed flight, sticking firmly to ceilings or walls, even under duress, or sending objects careening through the air with immense force. A full lashing creates a powerful, temporary gravitational bond between two objects or surfaces. It acts like incredibly strong magical adhesion, allowing a Skybreaker to stick enemies to walls, bind objects immovably together, or anchor themselves against incredible forces. A reverse lashing infuses an object with its own gravitational pull, causing other nearby objects to be attracted to it. This can be used defensively. For instance, making arrows or other projectiles veer towards a Radiant's shield, or offensively drawing debris towards an enemy. In combat, gravitation provides unparalleled mobility through flight, allows manipulation of the battlefield environment by turning debris into projectiles, enables control over enemy movement by altering their gravitational orientation or sticking them in place, and can enhance the force of physical blows. While Windrunners also wield gravitation, their use often appears more fluid, focused on personal movement, protection, drawing attacks to shields, and acrobatic maneuvers. Skybreaker usage, particularly as demonstrated by Szeth early on, can seem more forceful, controlled, and directly weaponized. Using lashings to slam opponents into surfaces or send them hurtling uncontrollably. The second surge, division, or nonish is often regarded with more fear. It is the surge of destruction and decay, allowing the surge binder to manipulate molecular bonds, causing objects to burn, corrode, crumble, decay, or disintegrate into dust or smoke. This requires conscious intent and a supply of stormlight. Visually, its effects are often described as gray smoke or ash erupting from the point of contact as the object's structure breaks down. Division is inherently dangerous and requires precise control. Its combat applications are devastating, destroying fortifications or obstacles, disintegrating an opponent's armor or weapons, or delivering lethal attacks directly against living beings by breaking down their physical forms. Szeth's use of division while wielding Jezrien's honor blade before formally becoming a Skybreaker showcased its terrifying lethality. The Surge's fearsome reputation likely stems from its inherently destructive nature, contrasting with surges like illumination, creating illusions or transformation, altering matter, and potentially linked to the historical memory or Nale's obsession regarding the destruction of Ashen, where uncontrolled surge binding, likely including division, played a role. The combination of gravitation and division grants Skybreakers a truly awesome power set. Gravitation offers control over fundamental forces, movement, and positioning, while division provides the power of absolute destruction and entropy. Entrusting such capabilities to an order founded on rigid adherence to external laws raises profound philosophical questions. Should those capable of such precise and devastating power also be the arbiters of justice? The potential for misuse, especially when guided by a flawed code or a compromised leader, is immense, making the Skybreakers arguably one of the most potentially dangerous Radiant orders. Like all Radiants who reach higher ideals, Skybreakers gain access to a resonance, a unique, often subtle ability derived from the specific interaction of their two surges. The exact resonance for Skybreakers has not been explicitly confirmed in the texts. However, speculation based on their surges and philosophy suggests possibilities. It might involve enhanced destructive precision, allowing them to use division with surgical accuracy, guided by gravitation's control. Alternatively, it could manifest as a form of truth sense or enhanced judgment, perhaps allowing them to perceive flaws in structures, physical or metaphorical, or discern falsehood by sensing instability, linking gravitation's grasp of fundamental bonds with division's power over decay. Another theory suggests an ability to divide or sever connections, whether physical bonds, spiritual connections, or even social pacts, reflecting their role as arbiters. Whatever its specific nature, their resonance would likely reflect and enhance their core focus on law, order, and judgment. Finally, like other Radiants, Skybreakers who swear sufficient ideals manifest Shardplate and Shardblades. These are not the dead blades and plate left after the Recreance, but living manifestations of their Nahel bond, formed from lesser spren, like Axia-Shren, perhaps attracted to the concept of rules, drawn to the Highspren. Shardplate is near invulnerable living metal armor that enhances strength and speed, summoned piece by piece. The Shard Blade is a similarly summoned blade of incredible sharpness, capable of cutting through nearly any non-shard substance and severing the soul or spirit web of living beings without leaving physical wounds, though it kills non-invested beings instantly. While aesthetically Skybreaker plate and blades might reflect their order's themes, perhaps appearing more angular, formal, or even incorporating black and white motifs, functionally they are similar to those of other orders. This contrasts with Nayla's Honor Blade, which is a dead metal artifact, not a living spren blade, requiring a constant infusion of stormlight to function, and lacking the bond's consciousness. The philosophy of the Skybreakers revolves around the concept of law, but their interpretation and application of this concept leads to profound moral complexities and internal conflicts. At its heart lies a tension between adherence to the letter of the law versus understanding its underlying spirit. Particularly under Nale's influence, the Order demonstrated a strong tendency to prioritize the exact wording of established codes, regulations, and historical precedents over considerations of intent, context, or moral outcome. Nale's justification for his crusade against potential radiance exemplifies this. He cited ancient laws or interpretations that prohibited uncontrolled surge binding, using this legalistic framework to legitimize actions that were, on their face, murder. He ignored the spirit of laws designed to protect Roshar by focusing narrowly on one potential interpretation related to the Ashen disaster. Similarly, Szeth's initial actions while bound by the Shin Oathstone reflected a terrifying purity of this principle. He followed his master's orders precisely, committing horrific acts while feeling absolved of responsibility because he was merely adhering to the law of his bond. This literal interpretation is reinforced by the nature of Highspren, who, as embodiments of external rules and agreements, are likely more concerned with procedural correctness and adherence to pacts than with subjective notions of fairness or compassion. This focus on external codes raises fundamental questions about authority and morality. Why would individuals choose to subordinate their own judgment to an external system? The appeal lies in the promise of certainty and order, in a world often perceived as chaotic and morally ambiguous. Adhering to a clear set of rules removes the difficult, often painful burden of complex ethical calculation. It provides validation through conformity and offers a sense of righteousness based on correct procedure rather than potentially flawed personal feeling. This might particularly appeal to those who distrust their own emotions, have been burned by subjective or arbitrary judgments in the past, or simply crave the stability of an unchanging system. However, this abdication carries significant risks. It diminishes personal responsibility for one's actions. I was just following orders. The code becomes a viable justification. It makes adaptation difficult, as situations not explicitly covered by the code can lead to paralysis or flawed application of existing rules. Most critically, it offers no protection if the chosen code itself is unjust, outdated, or malevolent, or if the chosen authority is corrupt. The Skybreaker path contrasts sharply with other Radiant Orders, whose philosophies often demand internal moral struggle. Windrunners must constantly weigh conflicting obligations of protection and leadership based on their own judgment. Edge dancers are driven by empathy to act for the forgotten, requiring them to perceive and respond to suffering directly. Truth Watchers seek underlying truths, implying a journey beyond established dogma. The Skybreaker path in its purest form, seeks to avoid this internal struggle by locking onto an external anchor. This provides stability, but potentially sacrifices moral growth and flexibility. The certainty offered comes at the cost of potentially calcifying one's ethical development, as the primary measure of progress becomes adherence, not necessarily the pursuit of what is truly good or right. This leads to differing conceptions of justice. For a Skybreaker deeply invested in the system, justice might simply be the correct and impartial application of their chosen law. Questions of mercy, rehabilitation, or mitigating circumstances become secondary or even irrelevant compared to the procedural requirements of the code. Punishment for transgression is often seen as the primary, necessary outcome. Nale's view represents the extreme. Justice is absolute, unforgiving adherence to his interpretation of preventative law. There is no room for mercy or individual consideration. Judgment is swift and final. Szeth's journey, however, represents a struggle against this cold view. Burdened by immense guilt from his actions under the Oathstone, he desperately seeks a truly just code, one that aligns with his underlying sense of morality and offers a path toward redemption. His eventual choice to follow Dalinar Kholin, whose codes emphasize unity, honorable conduct in war, and personal growth, suggests Szeth is searching for a form of justice that incorporates mercy, responsibility, and the potential for positive outcomes rather than just punishment. Considering traditional moral alignments, the Skybreaker Order demonstrates a unique capacity for extremes, precisely because its core philosophy is adherence-based, not inherently good or evil. A Skybreaker sworn to a just, compassionate, and wisely interpreted code could absolutely function as lawful good, striving to uphold righteous laws for the betterment of society. This seems to be the path Szeth aspires to under Dalinar. However, the default tendency of prioritizing the process of law over its moral outcome pushes the Order towards lawful neutral. Adherence to the chosen code is the paramount virtue, regardless of whether that code leads to beneficial or harmful results in a specific instance. The system itself is the highest good. Nale's trajectory tragically illustrates the potential for lawful evil. He used the framework of law, his interpretation of ancient decrees, and his authority as a herald to justify and carry out a millennia-long campaign of assassination, pursuing destructive and morally abhorrent ends under the guise of upholding a necessary order. The Skybreaker philosophy, therefore, does not dictate a moral alignment, but rather provides a framework that permits extremes. It can produce both paragons of impartial justice and terrifying legalistic tyrants, depending entirely on the nature of the code chosen at the third ideal, and the wisdom, or lack thereof, in its interpretation and enforcement. The journey of Szeth-son-Neturo, the assassin in white, serves as a powerful lens through which to examine the complexities, dangers, and potential redemptions inherent in the Skybreaker philosophy. His entire arc, tests the limits and implications of their ideals. Szeth's story begins in tragedy. Hailing from the isolated land of Shinovar on Roshar's western edge, he was declared truthless by his people for claiming the Voidbringers and Radiants were returning, claims considered blasphemous, but which were in fact true. Branded a slave, bound by honor to obey whoever held his oathstone, Szeth was forced to serve a succession of Rosharan rulers, becoming the most feared assassin in the world. Wielding Jezrien's honor blade, which granted him the surges of gravitation and transportation, though he often used division via experimentation or perhaps access granted by the blade's nature. And fueled by Stormlight, he carried out horrific assassinations, including that of King Gavilar Kholin, which helped trigger the War of Reckoning. Throughout these years, he was tormented by immense guilt and the screams of those he killed, yet felt bound by his cultural laws to obey the holder of his stone absolutely. This period served as a dark prelude, demonstrating the terrifying consequences of absolute obedience divorced from personal conscience. Following his supposed death and loss of the Honor Blade, Szeth was found by Nale. The Herald offered him not just survival, but also validation and purpose. Nale declared that Szeth had never been truly truthless, as his warnings were correct, thereby lifting the immense spiritual burden Szeth carried. He offered Szeth membership in the Order of Skybreakers, a structured society dedicated to law and order, promising the certainty and justification Szeth craved. For Szeth, traumatized and desperate for absolution, Nala's authority and the clear rules of the Skybreaker ideals seemed like salvation. He eagerly embraced the training, bonding a Highspren, progressing through the early ideals. Life before death. I will put the law before all else, and gaining legitimate access to gravitation, and, crucially, division as a Skybreaker. He found a sense of belonging and a framework that seemed to justify necessary actions in the name of a higher order. However, Szeth's desire for true justice soon clashed with Nale's methods. As he trained and operated alongside the Skybreakers, he witnessed Nale's ruthless crusade against nascent Radiance. He began to question the absolute righteousness of Nala's interpretation of the law. Was it truly just to execute individuals merely for the potential to wield power, especially when that power might be needed against the coming desolation? This internal conflict intensified, fueled perhaps by his own lingering guilt and his interactions with the sentient Shard Blade Nightblood, which he now carried, a blade with a simple, potent command: destroy evil. Nightblood's presence constantly forced Szeth to confront questions of morality and justification. The breaking point came during the confrontation at the Thaylen City Oathgate, as depicted in the book Oathbringer. Nale, enforcing his rigid interpretation of the law, ordered Szeth to execute Lift, a young edge-dancer Radiant who had interfered with their objectives. Faced with a direct command from the Master, he had considered swearing his third ideal to. Szeth hesitated. he recognized the profound injustice of executing a child who, despite breaking minor laws, represented hope and defiance against the darkness. In that moment, Szeth's own underlying moral compass asserted itself over the appeal of blind obedience. He refused Nale's order, effectively choosing his own understanding of justice over the decree of his potential master. This act of defiance marked a crucial turning point. Szeth realized he could not simply follow any external code. He needed to find one he truly believed was just. He identified Dalinar Kholin, the bondsmith, striving to unite Roshar and live by his own demanding codes of war, as embodying the principles he sought. At the climax of the Battle of Thaylen City, Szeth swore his third ideal, dedicating himself not to Nale, but to following Dalinar Kholin. He specifically swore to cleanse the Shin of their false traditions, indicating his intent to bring justice and truth back to his own people under Dalinar's broader vision of unity and honor. This choice is profoundly significant. Szeth chose a master and a code based not on fear, like Nale's code derived from Ashen, or cultural obligation, like the Oathstone, but on observed principles he judged to be righteous. Dalinar's efforts towards unity, his struggle for personal growth, his codes emphasizing honorable conduct even in war. This represents a potential evolution of the Skybreaker path, finding a way to satisfy the ideal's requirement for external dedication while still engaging personal moral judgment in the selection of that external authority. Szeth's journey demonstrates both the seductive appeal of the Skybreaker's certainty and the critical danger of unquestioning obedience. His eventual choice suggests that the path can be reformed, potentially reconciling the Order's focus on external law with a deeper commitment to genuine justice and morality. Szeth now stands as a figure representing a potential reformation for the Skybreakers. His future role could involve challenging Nale's lingering influence or leading a faction of the Order towards Dalinar's cause. His personal quest to bring justice to Shinovar, armed with his Skybreaker powers and the dangerous sentience of Nightblood, remains a volatile element. He embodies the ongoing struggle to define and enact justice within the demanding framework of the Skybreaker Oaths, offering a potential path away from the Order's darker history. As Roshar plunges deeper into the true desolation, the future of the Order of Skybreakers remains uncertain, poised between their shadowed past under Nale and the potential for change embodied by figures like Szeth. The question of leadership is paramount. Nale's current status following the events involving Ishar and his psychological state leave his capacity to lead unclear, while his influence over millennia is undeniable. Is he still actively directing the Order, or is his grip loosening? If a vacuum exists, Szeth-son-Neturo seems the most likely candidate to steer the Order in a new direction, given his progression and his allegiance sworn to Dalinar Kholin. However, would an Order steeped in Nale's indoctrination for centuries readily accept Szeth, an outsider who directly defied their heraldic patron. It's equally possible that other high-ranking Skybreakers, deeply loyal to Nale's rigid interpretation of law, might resist any change, potentially leading to fractures within the Order. The Highspren themselves might also play a role. With Nal's direct influence possibly lessened, will they seek out potential Radiants who hold different views on justice and law, perhaps drawn to individuals seeking to reform systems rather than just enforce them? The Order could split between traditionalists clinging to Nale's mandate and reformists aligning with Dalinar's coalition through Szeth. Their role in the war against Odium's forces is equally complex. Strategically, the Skybreakers are immense assets. Gravitation offers unmatched aerial mobility for troops and supplies, as well as battlefield control. Division provides a terrifyingly effective means of destroying enemy fortifications. Powerful constructs like thunderclasts, or even fused. How these powers are deployed, however, depends entirely on the Order's alignment. If they fully commit to Dalinar's coalition, following Szeth's lead, they could serve as elite shock troops, aerial support, and demolition experts. However, if factions remain independent or hostile, they could become dangerous wildcards. Skybreakers attempting to enforce wartime laws with absolute rigidity, regardless of circumstance, could actively hinder the Coalition's efforts. Prosecuting allies for necessary breaches of protocol or refusing cooperation based on legalistic interpretations. This sets up potential philosophical clashes with other Radiant Orders. How would Skybreakers focused on absolute law interact with Windrunners, prioritizing the protection of civilians above all else, potentially requiring breaches of command structure? Or with edge dancers driven by empathy to aid the forgotten, perhaps interfering with established military procedures. The war against Odium is inherently chaotic, demanding flexibility, adaptation, and sometimes morally gray choices for the sake of survival. The Skybreaker philosophy, particularly in its extreme form, shaped by Nal, represents the antithesis of this, a drive for absolute order. Can such a rigid system function effectively during an apocalypse, or will its inability to bend lead to its breaking, or worse, cause it to obstruct those fighting for Roshar's future? Their adherence to the letter of the law in a situation demanding desperate measures could prove disastrous. Looking beyond Roshar to the broader Cosmere, the Skybreakers interact with fundamental magical principles. Honor, the shard who invested the Heralds, and whose power underlies the Nahel bond and the very concept of oaths, is now splintered. How does the death of the God of Oaths affect an order so deeply tied to binding agreements and legal structures? Does it weaken their bonds, or does their focus on external codes provide resilience where orders more directly tied to honor's abstract intent might falter? The Cosmere concept of intent, the driving purpose behind a shard or an individual's actions, also provides an interesting contrast. Skybreakers focus on codified external law, which often reflects but can also diverge from the underlying intent. Is their focus too narrow, missing the deeper spiritual or ethical realities that intent represents? Could their path lead them into conflict with the intent of other shards? While highly speculative, one might wonder if Skybreaker-like philosophies, prioritizing external rules and structures, exist on other shard worlds. How might such an order interact with a shard-like autonomy, which values independence above all? Or preservation, which sought to maintain a rigid, unchanging system on Skadriel? The Skybreakers, in their unique focus, offer a fascinating case study in how fundamental Cosmere principles manifest under specific cultural and magical pressures. In conclusion, the Order of Skybreakers stands as one of the most complex and philosophically challenging groups within the Cosmere. Their journey stretches from the ancient desolations, guided by the Herald Nale, whose divine attribute of justice became tragically twisted by millennia of torment and trauma. Their bond with Highspren, sentient embodiments of external rules and agreements, reinforces their unique focus on adherence to codified law over personal conscience. This path is charted through the 5 ideals, a demanding ladder that begins with universal principles but quickly diverges, requiring dedication to an external code or master, culminating in the profound and potentially perilous state of becoming the law. Their history is marked by their survival of the Recreance, an event that destroyed most other orders, arguably because their rigid philosophy insulated them from the crisis of faith that followed the revelation of human origins. This survival, however, led to millennia under Nala's shadow crusade against nascent radiance, corrupting the Order's purpose. The story of Szeth-son-Neturo embodies the internal contradictions of the Skybreaker path, its allure of certainty and absolution, warring with the demands of conscience and true justice. His ultimate choice to follow Dalinar Kholin suggests a potential for reformation, a path where the framework of law might be guided by principles of unity and righteousness, rather than fear and rigid dogma. The Skybreakers compel reflection on the very nature of justice itself. They highlight the enduring tension between the letter of the law and its spirit, the appeal and the inherent dangers of seeking absolute certainty in a morally complex universe, and the critical difference between mere legality and true morality. Within the rich tapestry of the Stormlight Archive, they serve as a stark exploration of how systems of order, even those founded with noble intent, can be bent towards tyranny or cruelty, yet also potentially redeemed through conscious choice and a commitment to higher principles. Their story is far from over. As the true desolation rages, the Skybreakers face a crisis of identity and leadership. Will they cling to the rigid certainty of their past under Nal, potentially becoming obstacles or even antagonists in the fight for survival? Or will they embrace the possibility of change represented by Szeth, seeking a way to wield their immense power in service of a more nuanced, perhaps more truly just, future for Roshar. The enduring question of justice remains, and the Skybreakers in their power and their philosophy are now central to how that question will be answered in the storm-swept lands they call home. And so the story of the Skybreakers continues to unfold, written not just in ancient laws or heraldic decrees, but in the choices of those who dare to take up their oaths. They remain a stark reminder that the pursuit of justice is a perilous path, easily twisted, yet utterly essential. Thank you, dear lore seekers, for joining this exploration into the heart of law on Roshar. May your own path be clear and your rest be deep.